Tonight on Bridge City News, a controversial pro-life movie is set to hit theaters across Canada as early as July. We have the details. Gas prices are coming down. We find out why from Dan McTagg of GasBuddy.com. And it was a big party in Toronto today as millions of fans celebrated the Toronto Raptors' first NBA championship.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The controversial pro-life film Unplanned is expected to hit Cineplex and landmark theaters across Canada as early as July. The film is based on the memoirs of Abby Johnson, a former Planned Parenthood director turned pro-life advocate. In an email to Bridge City News, Cineplex confirms they're in talks with the distributor to screen the film at select theaters, but the deal has not yet been fully finalized. Len Binning, owner of the Movie Mill, says the movie will hit screens at his theater at a later date. Meanwhile, the pro-life organization Birthright will be shutting their doors later this year. After 39 years of serving Lethbridge and area, their board has made the decision to close the Lethbridge office in the fall of 2019. The main reason for their decision is the arrival of the Lethbridge Pregnancy Care Centre approximately 6 years ago. Since then, Birthright's clientele has dwindled to a third of its previous numbers.
We talked about what things we have here that we may donate to them because they're still, they're doing the same kinds of things. So all of our baby clothes and that sort of thing that have been donated to us will be going over there when we close. There is a bit of sadness because we've worked hard to make the organization successful and help a lot of people in Lethbridge, and so it is kind of sad that we're closing. We've had a lot of people who volunteered and supported us in a lot of ways, financially and in other ways, and so it's been very good for us. So.
Birthright says that over the years of Birthright being open, they've helped to save approximately 25 babies a year, which after 39 years works out to nearly 1,000 babies. The Galt Museum was packed this afternoon. Ainsley O'Reilly headed over to preview some of the very special events taking place within the Indigenous community.
Indigenous Peoples Week is taking place from June 18th to 25th, with everything taking place from Elders Tea to a Métis kitchen party. It's Monday and I'm at the Galt Museum checking out the opening festivities.
There is a lot of work. The schools are involved, different organizations such as Interfaith Food Bank. We here at the Galt Museum, the Fort Whoop up down below, the city planners at Galt Gardens. There is so much that goes into it.
Lunch was served with law enforcement, members of the Ambassador Watch program, and city officials present. Traditional Blackfoot dancing also took place, with education at the forefront.
For me, it's a long time coming, especially for my people of recognition, to start doing our stories.
Mainstream Society people, the members of the Mainstream Society here in Southern Alberta will get to understand that we are a very intricate part of the makeup of Southern Alberta.
The Lethbridge Métis Society was taking it all in too.
We are a presence, in Canada and in Southern Alberta. And for us, we're going to be hosting a kitchen party on Thursday evening from 4:30 to 8:30, and we invite the whole community to come down and just enjoy some Métis culture, some stew and some bannock, and there'll be some crafts going on, and of course some fiddle music and some jigging. So it's all part of our culture. We just want to share it with the community.
Check in with the Galt Museum because there's going to be fun events like these every single day. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
This afternoon, Exhibition Park presented the Community Issues Committee regarding the progress of the Exolution Development Project.
We're finalizing our financial modeling, which we're working on with City Administration. The second is the feasibility and finalization of the business plan for the existing infrastructure on Exhibition Park. And lastly is we're going to enter into a pretty aggressive stakeholder engagement series over the course of the next 3 months that will really allow the community to become involved and see where we're at and update them on where we're at with the project.
An Alberta MP wants to create stiffer penalties for those convicted of crime in rural areas. Red Deer Lacomb's Blaine Calkins says rural residents are tired with seeing a revolving door utilized by criminals. The new bill C-458, supported by Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder, would propose the criminal code be amended to add evidence that an offence was directed at a property or person vulnerable due to their remoteness. One local farmer and rancher says stiffer sentences may not do much to deter criminals.
Last year here on the farm, we had some Arab immigrants just drive right down the driveway, and they just started ripping vegetables out of our ground. You know, it wasn't even dark yet. And when I contacted the RCMP about it, he said, yeah, well, if you come and you give a statement, then, you know, and we had the license plate number and everything, and then we'll let them know that they shouldn't be doing that. I don't think that we'd have that same kind of problem if people had to take their lives into their hands trying to steal from farmers. And I believe that the primary crime problem here is because farmers have been disarmed by force.
According to October 2018 findings from the Rural Crime Task Force, rural Alberta crime rates were 38% higher than urban crime rates in 2017. You may have noticed that gas prices have been dropping once again. They've dropped another 3 cents a litre over the past few days in Lethbridge. Why are they dropping? To discuss this in more detail is Dan McTagg from GasBuddy.com. Dan, it's nice that prices are dropping, but why are we still 7 to 8 cents a litre more than cities like Calgary or Edmonton?
Well, look, Calgary and Edmonton, as far as gas prices are concerned, are probably the most difficult markets if you're a gas station owner. You're not making any money. You're losing money selling gasoline. So you've got to make it up selling coffee, selling premium gasoline, diesel, maybe pop, potato chips, and even the good beef jerky that they often serve. But the reality is that here in Lethbridge, $1.13.9, there's still room for those prices to drop. The magic number I look for, Hal, is what's the wholesale price plus taxes. And I don't care if you're in Calgary or in Lethbridge here, it's about 98, 99 cents a litre. The rest is what's known as a retail margin. Now, if I see gas stations selling for 91 cents a litre, they're giving away 7 cents. And they obviously have to find another way to make up the difference because they can't even afford the electricity to turn on their pumps, much less, honor your credit card, which takes 2 or 3 cents a litre off their bottom line. So they're losing probably closer to 10 cents a litre doing that.
Why are the prices coming down now, Dan?
The dramatic drop that we saw 2 weeks ago in gas prices, where they dropped as much as 15, 16 cents a litre wholesale, left a lot of gas stations in the impossible situation of having to sell gasoline below cost, and not just a small amount. You have to remember that 2 weeks ago, the wholesale cost, I refer today as $98.99, was more like $1.14, $1.15. So, you know, the idea of selling it for $1.10 or $1.09 to match Calgary would be absolutely insane. Plus, although Lethbridge is a big city, the bridge is, not a small place. The volumes that are turned around in places like Calgary are sometimes double what they might be an average gas station here in Lethbridge. And so you're able to go through your inventory a lot quicker, replace it with a cheaper gasoline, and offer that cheaper gasoline.
Can we expect them to remain lower throughout the summer?
Yes, and for one main reason. The world is very nervous with the moves by U.S. and China to intensify their tariff and trade war. This is likely to push the global economy into a position of what's known as demand destruction, or basically economies that aren't performing well, aren't moving the way they have in the past, may lessen their reliance on oil and gasoline. That means there's more fuel out there. It means that prices have nowhere to go but drop. And while that's good news for consumers, underlying it isn't great news for us here in Alberta, and I might say for the rest of Canada. A low commodity price is not good in anyone's interest, especially given the importance it has as being our #1 export, bar none, in this country.
That was former Liberal MP Dan McTagg, who is now with GasBuddy.com. Street sweeping continued in our city. Today's street sweepers were out in full force on the west side. Each year, the city collects thousands of pounds of rocks, dirt, and debris, some of which is recycled. The city reminds us to keep an eye out for no parking signs which are posted. Vehicles that are parked in no parking zones will be subject to a $30 fine and may be towed. Weather permitting, street sweeping runs Monday through Friday from 7:30 a.m. till 4:30 p.m. It will continue until early July. A skier died after police say he was struck by loose rock and fell down a rocky slope near the Canyon Ski Resort. RCMP say the 22-year-old man from Lethbridge was on Mount Hague Saturday afternoon when the tragedy occurred. They say 2 other skiers and some hikers attempted first aid, but to no avail. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner is working with police to investigate the incident. An investigation continues into a serious 2-vehicle collision involving a car and a motorbike near Red Deer that diverted traffic for 2 hours. A 28-year-old man riding the bike was flown by air ambulance to hospital last Thursday, but died from his injuries on Friday. The driver of the car was not injured. The federal Liberals hope to tackle the issue of criminalization of HIV no-disclosure if they're re-elected in the fall. Non-disclosure has led to assault or sexual assault charges against people with HIV because it has been found to invalidate a partner's consent. Justice Minister David Lametti says the government will not be able to act on the findings of an imminent report on the issue before the October election.
We don't have time to act legislatively. There's no question about that. Our legislative runway is over. The House will rise at some point, perhaps as early as next week. But that being the case, it is normal to have, the normal response period for a report is 120 days. So that's 4 months. I hope to be coming back in this role. I hope that our government will get re-elected, and so we'll be able to hit the ground running.
The federal NDP say if elected this fall, it will expand Canada's healthcare system. Step one will be fast-tracking a universal drug plan to ensure a late 2020 start date. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says it will inject $10 billion annually into a national pharmacare program.
Millions of Canadians are worried about being able to access the medication they need. In fact, people are living with pain because they can't afford to see a dentist. Families go to the eye doctor, and they're hoping against hope that the prescription hasn't changed because they can't afford a new set of eyeglasses. People are looking for help when it comes to depression, and they come up empty when they are most vulnerable in their lives. Friends, we have a crisis in healthcare, and it's time that changed.
Today was a very special day in Toronto as close to 2 million Raptors fans lined the streets celebrating the 2019 NBA champion Toronto Raptors. It's the first championship for the team in its 24-year history. Head coach Nick Nurse says this is a pretty big deal.
The magnitude of it here is just, again, it's so huge. Right? I talked to Sergio Scariola right afterwards, and I said to him, "Well, how does this compare to you, Olympics? You know, he's in the European Cup or the Euro League or whatever," and he just kind of said, "This is so big."
It's been amazing. It's been amazing, and and the highs, the lows. It's been so mentally and physically draining that it still hasn't hit you. You still it still feels like you're deep in the rabbit hole of games and coverages and all that kind of stuff.
As part of the celebrations today, Toronto Mayor John Tory gave Raptors superstar Kawhi Leonard the key to the city. No word yet if Leonard will be re-signing with the Raptors. There was also a report today that a woman was shot in Nathan Phillips Square in Toronto. The extent of her injuries is unknown. Now, when it comes to Christian faith, you should never put God in a box. That's according to Senior Pastor Kelly Stickle with the Victory Church in Lethbridge. Pastor Kelly says it can be dangerous if you put limitations on our Heavenly Father.
I grew up in the church, grew up being taught, very much was led to believe that God's sovereignty is everything, all things. I truly believe that God is sovereign, but I didn't really understand the impact that our thinking or that we have on God's will being accomplished. And many times throughout the Bible, Numbers 13 with the Israelites is one of those places in the Bible that tells us that our thinking, we have the ability to somehow limit God's will from being accomplished in our life. And we see many different places where His will was altered or changed or didn't happen because of the limitations that somebody's thinking put on Him.
Catch the full interview with Pastor Kelly discussing faith in the 21st century coming up in the second half of our show. Now here's some dramatic footage of a police chase in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Police received a report of someone shooting at a motorist from a car. When they chased the suspect, he fell 30 feet from a bridge. A warning now, what you're about to see is somewhat graphic.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Get it! Hey, can you hear me? Yeah. How many fingers am I holding up? 4. Okay. What hurts? Everything? Yes. You got anything in your pockets, man? Just the arm? Just the elbow? Yeah. Okay. Can you feel your feet? Yeah. Yeah?
The suspect sustained a fractured skull along with other injuries. He was arrested shortly after being released from hospital. A massive blackout left tens of millions of people without electricity in Argentina and Uruguay on Sunday. Government officials are looking into an unexplained failure in the neighboring country's interconnected power grid. Authorities were working frantically to restore power, but by mid-afternoon, about half of Argentina's 48 million people were still in the dark. Voters cast ballots by the light of cell phones in elections in Argentina. Weather officials say severe storms in central Indiana produced at least 4 tornadoes, leaving thousands of people without power and many buildings were damaged. Fortunately, no injuries were reported.
Looked like almost a finger coming down, and then it like touched the ground, and then when it touched the ground, then it just took off and kind of went around where we were at, and they formed, and then they went this direction.
Did you guys try to seek shelter?
It happened so fast, there was no time to. In other words, I just hollered at everybody, get underneath the picnic tables and grab a post.
It was on this date that the Watergate scandal began to unfold. O.J. Simpson is arrested in the slayings of his ex-wife Nicole and Ron Goldman, and singer Kate Smith dies. This is Today in History for June the 17th.
June 17th. 1972. One of America's greatest political scandals begins to unfold in Washington, D.C. 5 burglars are arrested inside the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex. Lawrence O'Brien, at the time the chairman of the DNC, later says this was no ordinary burglary.
It became clear to us that we were indeed involved in something that could only be described as political espionage.
The Watergate scandal forces Richard Nixon to become the first president to resign more than 2 years later. 1775. During the American Revolution, colonial forces and British troops fight the Battle of Bunker Hill near Boston. The battle, which actually happens on Breed's Hill, is a costly victory for the British, who suffer heavy losses. 1994.
911, what are you reporting? This is AC. I have OJ in the car.
O.J. Simpson is arrested after leading police on a low-speed chase in Southern California. The ex-football player is charged with murder in the slaying of his ex-wife Nicole and Ronald Goldman. Simpson is acquitted at his criminal trial, but he's ordered to pay millions to the victims' families in his civil trial. And 1986.
God bless America.
Singer Kate Smith, best known for her rendition of God Bless America, dies in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was 79. Today in History, June 17th. Camille Bohannon, The Associated Press.
We had a great Father's Day weekend with lots of sunshine, but some thunder showers, however, are in the forecast. Complete weather details are coming up. A low pressure system has moved in, bringing in a few clouds. A good chance of showers developing tonight with a low near 14. Tomorrow, more rain developing with a high near 22. Wednesday, showers and a high of only 18. The mercury will drop even further on Thursday. Rain and a high of only 12. Pretty much the same picture for Friday. Saturday, more showers developing and a high near 18. The rain should ease off Sunday with a high reaching 20 degrees. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 23 and an average low of 9. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1988 at 32 degrees, and the record low was +1 in 2000. Sunrise was at 5:23, sunset at 9:41. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Partly cloudy and 21 in Victoria, clouds, showers, and 22 for Vancouver. A good chance of thunder showers and 21 for Calgary tomorrow. Thunder showers and 22 for Edmonton. It'll be mainly sunny and 25 in Regina on Tuesday. Showers and 26 for Saskatoon. A mixture of sun and cloud and 24 for Winnipeg. Lots of sunshine and 23 is in the forecast for Toronto tomorrow. Mainly sunny and 25 for Ottawa. Partly cloudy at 25 degrees as well for Montreal. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be mainly sunny and 26. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have just a few clouds and 23. Charlottetown, PEI will be mainly sunny and 22. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a 30% chance of showers and a high near 13 degrees tomorrow. A new federal program to help households earning less than $120,000 a year buy a first home will be available as of Labor Day. The program will pick up 5% of mortgages no higher than $480,000 for existing homes. That rises to 10% for new homes in a bid to spur housing construction. The federal portion is interest-free and does not have to be repaid until people sell their homes or after they've lived there for 25 years. There was mixed reaction to an apology that Boeing executives made today at the Paris Air Show. The company apologized to airlines and families of victims of 737 MAX crashes in Indonesia and Ethiopia, saying it was very sorry for the loss of lives. The American airline is struggling to regain the trust of regulators, pilots, and travelers around the world following the crashes that claimed 346 lives. Some victims' families welcomed Boeing's gestures, but others said it was too little too late. The MAX aircraft is crucial to Boeing's future. Pfizer is spending $11.4 billion US to buy Array BioPharma. Its portfolio includes a treatment combination used for advanced skin cancer. The drug developer has seen its shares jump 41% since last month when it announced positive clinical trial results. Shares of the Colorado-based Array BioPharma surged 56% on the NASDAQ in morning trading. Huawei's founder and CEO today likened his company to a badly damaged plane and predicted revenues will be about $30 billion less than forecast over the next 2 years. Company officials say they have to reduce capacity, but vowed U.S. moves to restrict its business will not stop us. The U.S. has put Huawei on a blacklist, meaning American companies that want to sell parts to Huawei will need Commerce Department approval. U.S. officials have accused Chinese tech companies of stealing trade secrets and threatening cybersecurity ahead of the launch of the next generation of 5G mobile networks. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the controversial pro-life film Unplanned is expected to hit Cineplex and Landmark theaters across Canada as early as July. The film is based on the memoir of Abby Johnson, a former Planned Parenthood director turned pro-life advocate. In an email to Bridge City News, Cineplex confirms they're in talks with a distributor to screen the film at select theaters, but the deal has not yet been fully finalized. There's a senior pastor in Lethbridge who says it can be very dangerous if you put God in a box. Hear what Pastor Kelly Stickle from My Victory Church has to say next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. The annual Dragon Boat Festival is coming up June 21st to the 23rd in Lethbridge, and there are several opportunities for volunteers to get involved in this fun event. Organizers are looking for ride-side assistance, help with administration and t-shirt tents, and more. For more information on how to get involved and to sign up, visit lethbridgedragonfest.ca. Come celebrate with your Latin American neighbors at the Festival Latino Lethbridge 2019, taking place Saturday, June 29th, beginning at noon at Exhibition Grounds, Pioneer Park. Presented by the Lethbridge Latin American Association, enjoy live entertainment, dance performances, traditional Latin food, and more. All are welcome to this free event. For details, visit llaa.ca. So much to see and do on Canada Day. Come celebrate at the Galt Museum as they present an old-fashioned carnival. Taking place from 1 to 4 p.m., enjoy games, entertainment, and free popcorn. There's no cost for admission. For details, visit galtmuseum.com. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Every day, we all entertain hundreds or even thousands of thoughts. Some are positive, but some are also quite negative. To what degree do our thoughts affect our words and our actions? Our guest today has some interesting viewpoints on the subject. Kelly Stickle is the senior pastor of My Victory Lethbridge. He's also author of the book called Minecraft, Pastor Kelly, welcome to Bridge City News.
Yeah, thank you, Hal. It's great to be here.
So here's the book, Minecraft. Why don't you share with our viewers a little bit about what this book is all about?
Yeah, this book is basically my personal journal on a Bible study that I did on a number of verses that jumped out at me in the scriptures. And one of them in particular was Romans 12:2, where Paul talks about transformation comes by the renewing of your mind. And that word renewing really caught my attention. Because I thought that word indicates a process, that renewing is a constant process. So I wanted to do a Bible study on how do I continually renew my mind and what impact does that have on the rest of my life. And it was revealing for me, so I thought, man, I got to write this down and help other people as well.
Now, you make some pretty bold statements in the book, and one of them is, you are where you are right now because of the way you think.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, Solomon says virtually the same thing. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So our thinking, in the way that God designed us, our thinking plays a massive role in what we're able to accomplish and what we're able to do, and what our lives turn out and where they go. We are right now where we are right now because of the way we think, and that's very much a bold but true statement. But also, what's revealing in the scriptures is the fact that it also, our thinking also plays a role in how God reveals himself to us and in us and through us.
Now, you also talk a bit about Psalm 78:41 that says something very interesting. They tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. But let me ask you something, Pastor Kelly.
Yeah.
Can we actually limit God and put him in a box?
Yeah, that verse, I parked on that one for a long time because that word limit really caught my attention. And of course, it's that psalm is David talking about the Israelites, their journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. And he makes that statement that they limited God. And it jumped out at me because I thought, man, if they had the ability to limit God, is that possible? If they limited God, then that means that I have the ability to limit God as well. So I had to go back and read the story again. And it is very much, Numbers 13 reveals very much that their thinking limited God's will for their life, which God's will was for them, that generation, those people, Moses himself, to get into the Promised Land, and they didn't get there because of their thinking. They limited God's will.
So what are some of the other dangers then when we really put God in a box and we limit his will for us?
Yeah.
We can't receive all of those blessings that maybe he has for us in a bigger picture?
I believe that to be true. I grew up in the church, grew up being taught very much, was led to believe that God's sovereignty is everything, all things. I truly believe that God is sovereign, but I didn't really understand the impact that our thinking or that we have on God's will being accomplished. And many times throughout the Bible, Numbers 13 with the Israelites is one of those places in the Bible that tells us that our thinking, we have the ability to somehow limit God's will from being accomplished in our life. And we see many different places where his will was altered or changed or didn't happen because of the limitations that somebody's thinking put on him. So that's a scary thought, but that's something that I don't want to do. And I wanted to learn, how do I change my thinking so that I can take those limits off and let God do what he wants to do.
Now, you asked the question as well, when we put ourselves down with thoughts and words, are we actually putting ourselves down or our Creator? Who are we actually insulting?
Well, if we're wearing a Rolex watch and we insult the watch and put it down, are we degrading the watch itself, or are we degrading the maker? It's an insult to the maker. And I think God, when we put ourselves down, we're actually insulting the maker, who I think, God doesn't make average. God doesn't make weak. God doesn't make not enough. God is a God of more than enough, and he's a creator. So when we insult ourselves, I think we're actually insulting him.
Yeah, we're made in his image, right?
We're made in his image, yeah.
Now, you also quote neuroscientist Dr. Caroline Leaf as saying most of our thought life is not on the conscious level, but 90% on the subconscious level. So how can we maybe change and clean up our subconscious thinking?
Yeah, that point. She makes a numerous amount of points in her book, How to Switch on Your Brain. And one of the points that she makes, she says your subconscious is active 24/7, and it operates at 400 billion actions per second.
Wow.
As opposed to our conscious thinking that
they say men can't multitask.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, no.
And our conscious thinking only is active when we're awake, of course. And some of the women would probably say that doesn't always working when us men are awake either. But it only activates at 200,000 actions per second compared to the 400 billion. So the power of our subconscious mind is so very real, and yet it steers us. And I believe when Solomon says in the Bible about as a man thinks in his heart, he's not talking about the physical organ. I believe he's talking about the subconscious thinking in our hearts. And so when he's talking about that subconscious thinking, when he says above all else, Proverbs 4:23, guard your heart, your subconscious thinking, because out of it's going to flow the issues of life. And the original Hebrew language of that verse, it uses a word for issues that is actually a word that is commonly used in the Hebrew language for borders or fence lines. So basically it was saying, as you think in your subconscious, you're going to develop a fence line or a border on the rest of your life. So,
how many of us do you think actually read the Bible on a daily basis? And how can we make the Bible even more engaging for people? Is it through technology? Because it's still relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago.
It very much is. I'm very, very passionate about the Word and getting people into the Word. There's a great study done there by Center of Bible Engagement, and I include that study in the book. But they said that life change happens for Christians, not when we pray more, that's good, not when we attend church regularly, but life change really begins to happen when we read the Bible at least 4 times a week or more. And it's substantial stats that say, that these temptations greatly diminish when we read the Bible 4 times a week or more. And so very, very passionate about getting people into the Word. And I honestly think in today's church, that's probably one of the weakest links, honestly, is people daily reading the Bible. We rely too much on Bible teachers or on our pastors to teach us the Word, and we don't get into it enough personally. And so I do think we need to use any avenue, every technology, whatever it takes to get in the Word, use it, and to engage yourself in the Word, because that's when life change is going to happen.
What about negative thoughts that bring us down? Maybe the devil plants a seed of doubt in our hearts and our minds, and then you kind of dwell on that instead of reflecting back on God's Word and His promise for our lives and His love for us. So how can we push those negative thoughts out of our lives so it doesn't impact us?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do, and I know that I've done for years, when I have a negative thought, I feel ashamed or guilty that I had that negative thought, so then I repent and ask God to forgive me for that negative thought, and then I don't feel the guilt or the shame go away right away, so then I repent again. And in the process of doing that, I think we just kind of end up in this cycle or in this pattern of dwelling on that thought longer than we need to. And Paul says in Corinthians to cast down those imaginations, anything that rises up against those things. So cast that down doesn't mean dwell on it, repent for it. He doesn't say, beg God to forgive you for that. He just says cast it down, get rid of it. So I think what we need to do is that those thoughts are going to come, that we're human beings, we're going to have negative thoughts.
Especially self-critical thoughts too,
Self-critical thoughts.
We are our own worst critics, aren't we?
Absolutely. And our own thinking is rarely accurate. And if we listen to ourselves instead of talk to ourselves, I think we get into big trouble. But I think we need to cast those thoughts aside and replace them, like Paul says in Philippians 4. Think on these things. Whatever's true, whatever's right, whatever's pure, whatever's honest. Dwell on these things. Think on these things. And I think that's probably the most powerful way. Don't dwell on that negative thought. Cast it aside. Choose to think on something else.
How about positive words? Do they really impact our positive thought process as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Out of the heart, Jesus said, the mouth speaks. So I think we can change our thoughts, our thinking by what we say, and I think sometimes, like I said earlier, we need to maybe do less listening to ourselves and to our thoughts and more talking to ourselves, and put the positive on our tongue and begin to speak. So when we feel that self-critical thought, I think instead replace it and use Scripture. No, I'm a child of God. No, I am blessed with every spiritual blessing. No, I'm the head and not the tail, above only and not beneath. No, I'm a righteous. I've been made righteous in Christ Jesus. So just suddenly change those things by speaking the opposite.
So how do you know when the devil really has a foothold in your life, in your heart? How do you know that in your life? What are some of the signs, like warning signs?
I think, again, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. I think that when there's something not right in our heart, it is eventually going to come out of our mouth. We're going to say something we didn't mean. We're going to hurt somebody we didn't mean to. Something's going to come out. We're going to say something about ourselves or about somebody else or about a situation. And we think, when that happens, we think, where did that come from? That's not me. I didn't really mean that, whatever that might be. But out of that's a trigger that something's in there that is not right. And I think, don't panic about it. Just realize it's in there. Let's change it. Let's refocus.
So 2 Corinthians 10:5 talks about taking every thought captive. What exactly does that mean then?
Yeah, I think
deeper into that.
Yeah, I think philosopher Plato said this years ago that thinking is just self-talk. So it's how we talk to ourselves. So I think taking that thought captive, I think we need to be aware of the thoughts that are in our head, pay attention to them, take the negative ones and cast them aside. It's the same verse, cast those down, those imaginations, take that thought captive, take that captive and saying, no, I'm not going to dwell on you anymore. I'm not going to listen to you anymore. You're not the truth. This is what the truth is. And that's why I think it's so important for us to get in the Word. We need to know what God says about us, because what we say about us is not always good, but what God says about us is amazing. And we can take that thought captive and tell it just like what Jesus told the devil when the devil started tempting him about who he was or who he wasn't or what he could do. No, it is written. That was Jesus' first response. And the devil had to, he had to flee when Jesus quoted the word and said, no, this is what my Father says about me.
Okay, let's talk about finances. For many people, it's a real struggle. Families are struggling here in Alberta, especially with what's going on in the energy sector. How should we pray specifically about our finances?
Yeah, I think what we need to do is take those thoughts captive and realize that fear is going to come in, doubt is going to come in. Those things aren't going to be healthy. Worry is just projected fear. So if we worry about the fear coming out, what could happen? I think we need to take those thoughts captive first of all. I think we need to get into the Word and understand what the Word says. So the Word says that He delights in the prosperity of His servants. Okay, that He supplies all of my needs according to His riches and glory. That I can begin quoting these things when fear comes in. And then I think we need to pray like Jesus taught His disciples how to pray. He didn't say, talk to your problems, talk to God about your problems. He said, no, speak to the mountain and tell it to move. So in other words, if we just continually to talk to God about our problems, then what we're doing is we basically make the problem bigger and bigger. The more we talk about any problem, whether it's to each other or whether it's to God, the more convincing it becomes, the bigger it becomes, the more we talk about it.
How about talk solutions maybe?
Yeah, talk solutions, right? and talk to the problem about God. Talk to the problem about how big God is and that nothing's difficult for Him. Everything is possible with Him. So when we do that, I think we're like David did. Saul and his army talked about in 1 Samuel 17. They talked about Goliath, how big he was, how long his spear was, how heavy his shield was, how experienced he was. They had all the details of Goliath down to a T. And little David shows up and he says, who is this guy that he would taunt my God? And then when he faced Goliath, he didn't talk, God, this guy's big, help me defeat him. No, he talked to Goliath about his God and said, today my God is going to deliver you into my hands. So I think we need to do the same thing with our finances.
Do you think maybe God actually likes it when we ask Him for some really big things?
Yeah.
The bigger the better? Because we serve an awesome, mighty God, right?
Yeah.
All powerful?
I think I've had this idea with faith, that the bigger the answer I need, the bigger faith I need to coincide. And I don't believe that anymore, that I think, the size of our faith, we focus so much on having more faith and the bigger faith. And I don't think, Jesus minimized the importance of the size of faith. Faith the size of a mustard seed, he said. Right. So the size doesn't matter. It's the location that matters. And the location of our faith is Jesus said this in Mark 11:22, have faith in God. Not have faith in the answer, but have faith in God. In Genesis 18, Sarah was promised to have a child. She's 90 years old, and she says, is it possible? That was a big ask. Sure. Is it possible for a 90-year-old to have a child? And with that question, the answer is no. And I need big faith in order to make that happen. Well, the angel of the Lord came and spoke to her and said, why'd you ask that? Instead, you should ask, is anything too difficult for our God? So I think, ask big things, and then ask the question right after that, is anything too difficult for my God? And the answer to that, of course, is no.
What should we give power to and not give power to? We talked a little bit about negative thoughts. Don't give them a chance to fester and grow into something bigger that you can't even handle, but our God can handle it. Yeah. But what should we really focus and put our thoughts into? Our mindset.
Yeah, I believe that what you focus on, you give power to. So if you change your focus, if you focus on the negative, you're empowering the negative. If you focus
on, you're feeding it, right?
You're feeding it, and it becomes bigger. If you focus on the positive, if you focus on what the Word says, if you focus on what you lack and what you're not and what you don't have, you're empowering that. It's going to grow bigger in your heart and in your mind, and you're going to just. As you think in your heart, you're going to become. But if you focus on how big God is, That's where I think we need to focus. That more so than what I need, than what I want. I think we need to focus on who our God is, how big He is, what He can do, what's possible with Him. And when we do that, all things become possible.
Senior pastor of My Victory here in Lethbridge, Kelly Stickle, and author of the book Minecraft. Thanks so much for joining us here on Bridge City News.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
The world was shaken by the callous mass shooting at 2 New Zealand mosques that took 50 lives at the hands of a white supremacist. Now, is this particular brand of terrorism a major threat that is likely to repeat itself often in the future? Joining me now to discuss this further is Dr. John Robson. He's an invited professor at the University of Ottawa and a National Post columnist. And John and I also used to work together for the now defunct Sun News Network in Ottawa. John, how have you been?
I've been well, thank you. How about yourself?
Good, really well. Now, John, you recently wrote an interesting piece in the National Post entitled, "Sorry, Woke Brigade, White Nationalism Isn't a Major Threat." Now, in your article, you take issue with a tweet from Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, which basically said that white supremacist terrorism needs to be at the top of the agenda in discussions about terrorism. Is Freeland wrong?
She's completely wrong, and it's important to realize that she said that at the United Nations. So she wasn't even talking about Canada, where I think proportionally white nationalism is probably a larger threat than it is globally. Around the world, something like 20,000 people a year are killed by terrorists, and very, very few of them are killed by white nationalists. In most countries, none at all. And what I thought was especially odd about this is that she seemed to be thinking only about Western countries and the things that happen here. That in a way, most of those people are invisible to her because the attacks happen in countries like Nigeria. And it seems so strange that our very globally minded, very woke foreign minister would just brush aside thousands of deaths. So, well, that doesn't interest us very much. And then, of course, we had the attack in Sri Lanka. And well, okay, is this not evidence that perhaps the real threat is Islamist terror, which in fact claims the majority of those lives? And most of the victims, I should emphasize, are not white. They're not Christian. They're mostly other Muslims. That's who's being killed by terrorists. And if we care about them, we should care about who's killing them.
So you're not saying that white supremacy is not a problem, but in comparison to the other types of terrorism that take place around the world, this one is nowhere near the top.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's not like it's a contest. It's not like it doesn't matter if white nationalists kill somebody, or as in the case of New Zealand, kill dozens of people. And that shooter, though his manifesto is a bit confused, he seems to have been a genuine white nationalist, that he targeted Muslims primarily because they weren't white, and he didn't like Muslims either. But, I mean, white nationalist, it's a complicated term, and as I point out in the piece, when you look at the major killings in the 20th century, and the biggest killers are Mao, Stalin, and Hitler. And Mao is ethnic Chinese killing other ethnic Chinese. Stalin is white. He's killing other white people. He primarily targets Ukrainians in his man-made famine for cultural reasons, because they are individual farmers and he's trying to impose collectivism. And Hitler's victims primarily were Jews, who, of course, it's ethnic and religious, but the Jews were as white as the Germans who were killing them. So you look around the world for the harm done by white nationalism or by white racism, of course, what you primarily see is racial slavery, a terrible evil over centuries. And I'm by no means minimizing that, or the fact that these white nationalists, squalid as they are, aspire to be dangerous, and they do sometimes manage it. But what I'm saying is the biggest killers are Islamists. And so if your idea is that we should stop every death we can due to terrorism, you look at who's killing the most people and you put them at the top of the list, and it's not white nationalists.
So do you think maybe Chrystia Freeland tweeted this about white supremacy and the terrorism just to simply score some political correct points with a liberal base?
Well, one is tempted to ascribe things to cynicism in politics, partly because Dumas once said that he preferred rogues to fools because rogues took vacations, and they know what they're doing. The trouble is with politicians, so often what you see is what you get, that you go, they can't be that shallow, and then you go, yeah, that really was all they had, that this is her woke, politically correct way of thinking about the world. And I wish that it was pretense and that secretly she was telling the Canadian security services, okay, watch out for ISIL, watch out for these guys, and also watch out for white nationalists and other, watch everything, but whoever guards everything guards nothing. So I wish I could just say, no, it's okay, it was just cynical. She knows what she's doing. But I've watched politics for a lot of years, and when they say something utterly foolish about economics, it is what they think. When they say something utterly foolish about budgeting, it is what they think. When they say something utterly foolish about security, it is what they think.
John, let me ask you something. Why is it that a lot of the mainstream media and politicians want us to feel guilty about being middle-aged white men? Or just being white, period? What's going on right now? Why is there that trend?
The great strength of Western civilization has always been its capacity for self-criticism, and we shouldn't regard it as a bad thing. It's why the West has done so well over the years, because we always ask ourselves what we're doing wrong. But it can turn into something resembling self-hatred. I remember years ago, Vladimir Bukovsky is a Soviet dissident, and he said that American liberals are like the backward dog of Russian folklore. They wag their tail at strangers and they bark at their own family. And I think it just goes overboard, and we forget, when people talk about, oh, patriarchy, and isn't patriarchy awful? If you want real, terrible patriarchy, out of control, violent and murderous, look at the Islamists, because they are the male supremacists supreme on this planet. And instead you get Sunara Tobani saying, well, we'll never get rid of oppression of women until Western influence is eradicated. Good heavens, the West is the only place that ever tried to deal with the inequality of women. And I think these people just have hold of the wrong thing. They've lost their sense of perspective. And as a result, they fail to understand that the fact that we admit to our wrongs and we try to make amends for them, we look at slavery and say, how could the established institutions of Western society not have seen the evil of this form of racism? That's not because we're evil. It's because we're trying very hard to be good. We're asking, what did we get wrong? How can we get it better? And they should be happy about that. They shouldn't look at it and say, so you admit it. But too often, that's what they do.
Now, federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer was accused recently of Islamophobia because he did not specifically say that the victims of the New Zealand shootings were Muslim. How should public figures really handle these kinds of things?
Well, I think they should not second guess themselves. They should speak the truth. And it's interesting because there was both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton tweeted about the massacre in Sri Lanka and about Easter worshippers. Neither of them said the word Christian. Like, who worships Easter? Like, she was passé back when the Venerable Bede was writing. But nobody picks on them and says, hey, why don't you say the word Christian? But why didn't Andrew Scheer say they were Muslims? I mean, they're worshiping in a mosque. It doesn't take a lot of wit to figure out that they were Muslims, and indeed that they were targeted. As I say, I think first because they were non-white, but second because they were Muslim. It's quite clear that this was part of the murderous hatred directed at them. So just say, somebody murdered a bunch of Muslims. But at the same time, the liberal angle that Andrew Scheer is somehow, a secret Klansman minus the hood, that he's in bed with the white nationalists, that he probably is a white supremacist. Oh, come off it. Andrew Scheer is one of the nicest guys you could ever meet. He might have bad policies. He might be, kind of a milquetoast as a politician. But a white supremacist? And again, you'd think, please tell me it's cynical, that they know he's not really. But the trouble is, with politicians, so often what you see is what you get. That's really how they think.
The Calgary Stampede a couple of years ago, I had the chance to interview Andrew Scheer, and I got to tell you, he's one of the most humble, down-to-earth, approachable politicians you're ever going to meet. Now, you wrote about Nidal Hassan, who killed 13 people at Fort Hood in 2009, and what the Obama administration insisted was workplace violence. What effect does that have on the public if our leaders continue to frame things this way?
Well, to some extent it misleads them, but to some extent it drives them nuts, and they get alienated from mainstream politics. People look at Donald Trump and say, how could this man have won the election? And I didn't think he could either. But part of it, I think, is that a lot of ordinary people are fed up with this kind of walking on eggshells and refusing to tell the truth, refusing to give the Purple Heart to the people wounded in that shooting because it wasn't related to their service in the military. I mean, that's just so mean and petty. And what do you think, we don't know that he was shouting Allahu Akbar? You think we don't know what it means? Or you think, well, we'll turn against Muslims and unless you pretend that this guy wasn't an Islamist? No, we're just going to think you're lying to us and you're idiots. So I don't know what they hope to accomplish, but it achieves the opposite. Again, as I said about Andrew Scheer, I say the same thing about Justin Trudeau and Barack Obama and everybody. Talk to us like adults. Admit it when something happens that doesn't quite fit your narrative of the world, and then explain to us why you're still right. Don't start evading and getting all slippery, because then we just stop trusting you.
So, John, you say you wish more of our leaders would be concerned more about anti-Christian violence internationally, countries like China, North Korea, Pakistan, what happened in Sri Lanka. Tell me more about that.
In many respects, Although Muslims are most likely to be victims of terrorism in the world, Christians are the most persecuted religion. They're being driven out of the Middle East, including, the traditional homeland of Christianity. And there's kind of a feeling of, well, if we stand up for them, we're being bigoted, we're being patriarchal, we're being white nationalists, so don't mention it, as though it were okay because they're like us. Which maybe is one step above thinking it's okay if people are not like us are being persecuted, but it's not much of a step. The Chinese government is targeting them. If what is being done to Christians around the world were being done to Muslims, there'd be a huge outcry. If it were being done to Jews, I think there'd be more of an outcry, though anti-Semitism is a rising danger in our society. Too much of the left says they're anti-Zionist, and what they mean is they're anti-Semitic. There's just no getting around it. This weird, distorted news we get out of the Middle East, a fixation on Israeli atrocities, a great number of which are made up, and virtually no attention to the terrible things the Palestinians are doing to each other and, when they can, to Israelis as well. It's amazing the number of times people say, well, if only Israel was reasonable, there'd be peace in the Middle East. You look at what's on Palestinian TV, and in Israel's neighbors, the blood libel is mainstream. That's where the problem is. But for all the horrors of anti-Semitism on a per capita basis, the worst persecution is against Christians. And we shouldn't call them Easter worshippers. We should call them Christians. We should insist that they have a right to live in peace. And as with anti-Semitism, we should regard anti-Christian violence as not just bad in itself, but as a worrying sign of the tenor of a society or a government.
John, anti-Semitism is definitely on the rise. We've had those stories here on Bridge City News as well. What needs to change in the way Western governments and the United Nations respond to this?
Well, the United Nations, I've long thought, should be dismantled brick by brick and thrown into the East River. So phooey to the United Nations, Anti-Semitism is sort of popular there, and you're not going to get that fixed because so many governments at the United Nations are nasty, illegitimate, and anti-Semitic. But Western governments, again, should not grovel. They shouldn't pretend we're not wrong when we're wrong. They shouldn't pretend that our history is pristine, but they should be proud of the fact that we and we alone, just about in the world, look back at our history and say, what did we do wrong? Instead of saying, we're the greatest, on often the most astoundingly spurious grounds. And they should say Christianity did not cause the world's problems. For instance, Christianity was instrumental in abolishing slavery. There was slavery under Christianity, and there was racial slavery. But the difference is that Christianity also had abolitionist movements, and those simply don't exist elsewhere in the world. And that's something we should be proud of. We should be proud of the fact that the push for rights for women is uniquely Western. We should be proud of the fact that individual freedom and the notion that the individual is made in the image of God and has inherent dignity are Western ideas. We should be proud of Magna Carta, and we should say we must always strive to live up to those ideals. We must confess and repent when we don't. But we shouldn't pretend that people who scorn those ideals are better than people who sometimes fall short of them. We should be proud of the Western tradition. That doesn't mean being white nationalists. Anybody who cherishes Magna Carta is welcome. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter if your ancestors were on the other side of the world from Runnymede in 1215. That has nothing to do with it. But our tradition is a great treasure, and we should cherish it, and we should be proud of it.
Does the conversation also tie into some degree with our immigration and national security policies? Do we really need to change something in the way we screen or vet potential terrorists finding their way to live in Canada?
I think we certainly need to do that. And I think we ought to have an immigration policy that favors the kind of people who want to come to Canada because of what it's like. Somehow that, too, is regarded as bigoted, that we should want immigrants who want to make Canada like the place they came from or indeed fled from. And again, immigration is a very top-of-mind issue. It's one of the reasons Donald Trump won. And if people are going around saying only fascists want to control immigration, the danger is that ordinary people are going to go, gosh, I must be a fascist. Who knew that? There's no reason why we shouldn't be selecting immigrants who want to be Canadian. But for that, again, we have to be proud to be Canadian. And again, yes, our national security policy on immigration needs to be aware that bad guys are trying to get into the country, and we shouldn't be shy about trying to keep them out. That's not bigoted. That's just being rational, including in the interest of all the law-abiding immigrants who come here, including if immigrants are coming here from a country with a powerful Islamist terrorist movement, the last thing they want is for those guys to come in next to them. They're coming here to get away from that stuff.
John, let me ask you something. You and I go out for coffee, and I sit down with you and I ask you, John, how would you describe a Canadian? How would you define a Canadian?
Well, I would define a Canadian, you see, as someone who is born free. Remember, it was Wilfrid Laurier who said Canada was free and freedom is its nationality. Canadians always had small government. They cherished Magna Carta. They believed very much in free speech. They even, until fairly recently, they believed in the right to bear arms. This astounds people. But you look at what Sir John A. Macdonald said about the subject, and he said, gun control just disarms the law-abiding and leaves weapons in the hands of the rowdies. Canadians always had a small government because they were big. That's how this country ought to be. And the idea that Canadians have embraced big government, it's historically wrong and it's insulting that we can't do things for ourselves, including charity. So this might sound like I've mistaken this for some other country, particularly, say, the southern United States, but that's just because people don't understand our heritage. They don't understand who we are, why Canadians were so formidable in 2 world wars. It was to do, part of it was, yes, proficiency with arms, but mostly it was to do with a habit of self-government. Our privates, our corporals, our junior commissioned officers could take the initiative on the battlefield without discipline breaking down. This is a remarkable thing, and it's because we're part of the West. It's because we were founded on Magna Carta. And so to me, every immigrant who comes into this country, when they are made a citizen and they take the oath, I wish we would hand them a copy of Magna Carta and say, now it's yours. Congratulations.
And there you have it. National Post columnist Dr. John Robson, thanks a lot for joining me today from Ottawa.
My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.